Good morning. Welcome to the City of Phoenix Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 9:37 a.m. I'd like to ask you all to join me this morning in a moment of silence. It is National Police Week, occurs every May, and is an event put on by the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum. It's intended to memorialize our fallen officers, and this week, Officers Gennaro New and Matt Hefner will be memorialized on the wall at the museum during the candlelight visual taking place on the 13th. In addition, May 15th is National Peace Officer Memorial Day, so please join me in a moment of silence to remember our officers. Thank you so much. We will turn to David Benton to discuss public comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. During citizen comment, members of the public may address the subcommittee for up to 3 minutes on issues of interest or concern to them. The Arizona Open Meeting Law permits subcommittee members to listen to the comments, but prohibits members from discussing or acting on matters presented. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any call to the public?
We have no call to the public.
Thank you so much. Do I have a motion to approve minutes of the Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee?
Move to approve.
Second. We have a motion, first and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. We have consent items. Sorry, I want to go back to the, do want to note that the approval of the Neighborhood Block Watch Oversight Committee's recommendation for the 2022 Grant Program Awards is going to be continued to our June meeting. We have a consent action item number 2. Do I have a motion?
Move to
no,
approve.
that is consent. I apologize. That is that item. Information items only are 3 and 4. Are there any questions, or are you good with that?
Can I just ask for a brief?
Sorry, could you?
Can I ask for just a brief update on how the hiring's going?
Yes, sir.
It doesn't have to be detailed like we've had in the past, just curious.
Madam Chairwoman, Councilman Waring, I'm sorry, what was the question, sir?
Broadly stated, how's it going?
In terms of our recruitment and our hiring, we have good news to report that we are starting to get more people into our academy classes. We have a class of 16 that is scheduled to graduate in just a couple of weeks. We have a smaller class that will graduate in July. We look to fill classes of 18 to 20 in consecutive months, May and June. Those are fresh recruits. That's good news for us. Attrition continues to be a challenge, but at least we're finally getting new recruits through the door.
Are we having, Madam Chair, Chief, a net increase?
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, no, sir, we are not seeing a net increase as of yet.
So I was at an event this morning, Madam Chair, and somebody just asked me this question, and I wasn't familiar with the specific numbers you just laid out, but I thought I had a pretty good ballpark. And what I said is it's not the cliff that we were skating down before, but it's still not going in the direction we like. Because the question was asked me, have things stabilized? Is stabilized fair, given that it's still trending down, or is that too positive of a word?
Madam Chair and Councilman Waring, I'm the ever optimist, so we are trending in a positive direction, but we have not yet stabilized.
I think that's fair. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the update, Chief. We will move to item 5, a reappointment of Phoenix Municipal Court judges and Chief Presiding Judge. And for that, we have Chief Judge Taylor with us.
Members, It's a pleasure to be with you here this morning. As you know, on the agenda are the reappointments of two of our municipal court judges, as well as myself. The Judicial Selection Advisory Board has met and interviewed the judges. They have unanimously recommended to the subcommittee that the subcommittee recommend to the full council the reappointment of all the judges. Let me speak not for myself, but here for Judge Lowry and Judge Solomon. I would add my full-throated endorsement to the Judicial Selection Advisory Board recommendation to you to recommend both of them for reappointments to additional 4-year terms. I am open to any questions that the subcommittee might have.
Thank you, Judge Taylor. Any questions? Do we have a motion?
Madam Chair, I move to reappoint Judge Laura Lowry as Judge of the Phoenix Municipal Court for a 4-year term that would end on September 30th, 2026, and Judge Tina Solomon as Judge of the Phoenix Municipal Court for a 4-year term that would end on June 29th, 2026. And I further move to reappoint Chief Presiding Judge B. Don Taylor III as Chief Presiding Judge for an annual term that would end on June 30th, 2023.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Congratulations. Thank you, sir. Item number 6 on the agenda is the unmanned aircraft systems, or drones, and for this we will turn to Assistant City Manager Lori Bays.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. My co-presenters are making their way to the table, and I will introduce them momentarily. This report is to provide an update on the policy development and community engagement related to unmanned aircraft systems, otherwise known as drones, the development of our program, as well as an update on overall program implementation. Excuse me, I'm having trouble talking this morning. So with me today, I'd like to introduce Executive Assistant Fire Chief Scott Walker. I'd also like to introduce Deputy Fire Chief Dan Cheatham, Commander Brian Lee with our police department, and Jared Rodgers, Deputy Director for our Parks and Recreation Department. And we will be sharing the presentation today, but I will get us started. And what I'd like to first start with is just an overview of what we'll discuss today. We will talk about some background information and how we got to where we are today, the citywide governance structure that has been developed and is outlined in our administrative regulation. We will also talk about the development of our programs in the fire, police, and parks departments and the use cases there. At that time, we'll take a little bit of a pause to see if you have any questions about the program itself, and then we'll talk about our community engagement meetings and the sessions that we were asked to conduct by the council in February. We've conducted those over the months of March and April, and we're here to provide you that information and the feedback that we gathered during those sessions. We also made some changes based on that feedback, so we'll talk about the changes that have been incorporated into our policies, as well as next steps. So to give you a little bit of a background, you are aware that we began discussions related to drones back in 2015, but we came to this very subcommittee in January of this year to provide a presentation, and at that time we discussed the governance structure and the implementation plan that we had in place at that time. The subcommittee gave us direction to move forward with phase 1, which was for the fire department, and then in February we were asked to adjust those plans by the full council at the February 16th, 2022 council meeting, where the council approved purchase of drones for the police department in addition to the fire department, moving those two departments both into phase 1, with the expectation that we would engage the community on policy development for the police, fire, and parks departments. So that is what we're here to discuss today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Executive Assistant Fire Chief Scott Walker, and he's going to talk with you. And just a reminder for everyone, including members of the public, of what we discussed in January related to the governance structure and the overall program design.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Bays. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm Executive Assistant Fire Chief Scott Walker. So the portion that I will be covering on the next few slides will focus on the citywide unmanned aircraft system program, the safety measures we will be putting in place, and the regulations all programs will adhere to. With a city the size of Phoenix, with more than 25 different departments, with almost 15,000 employees serving 1.7 million residents, it is important that we create an overarching governance structure that all UAV programs would work within, but still allowing enough latitude for each department to accomplish their unique mission to serve the community. We have accomplished this goal with the creation of the City of Phoenix Unmanned Aircraft System Policy. This policy has been codified by the creation of a city administrative regulation. This governance structure will provide the necessary parameters for all departments that want to have a UAS program. Our early adopters, fire, police, and parks, are all following this structure and process as outlined. Two of the key components of this governance structure include the Technical Security and Privacy Subcommittee and the Executive Committee. The TS&P Subcommittee consists of the Fire and Police Department UAV Program Managers, a representative from the City Attorney's Office, a representative from the Information Technology Services Department, a representative from the City Risk Management Department, and our privacy attorney contracted by the city. This subcommittee is responsible for reviewing the individual department proposed UAV programs, ensuring that all compliance with city standards, privacy protections, cybersecurity, and insurance requirements are being met. The Executive Committee, which is made up of your Assistant City Manager, your Police Chief, your Fire Chief, your Information Technology Services Director, your Aviation Director, and 2 members from the private sector, will be the final reviewing and approving group. What way that will work is the department that chooses and desiring to have a UAV program will submit their program to the Executive Committee. The TS&P Committee that will have already reviewed that proposal will then make recommendations to the Executive Committee, and the Executive Committee will make a final vote, a final approval or denial of that program. Based on that, a program will move forward once receiving approval. All departments that want to have a UAV program will go through this process. Some of the other benefits of this structure we built will ensure transparency. We know that it's an expectation of our community that government is transparent in all that we do. This process, this structure will provide for that. This will ensure consistency. This is extremely important in a city our size. As I've mentioned, multiple employees, multiple departments that we are sometimes can be challenged with consistency. This will ensure that consistency as other programs come online in the future. This will protect privacy for our community, not only privacy requirements that are built into our city systems already, but our constitutionally protected rights that our residents expect from us. And finally, we know the Aviation Department and the Water Department have expressed interest for future programs. This is the process they'll follow. They will know how to bring a UAV program forward for their departments. Next, I want to cover some of the safety measures that have been put in place that all departments will be required to follow. So multiple safety measures are in place that all departments will adhere to and be incorporated in all programs. These measures include the following. All pilots will be FAA certified 107 pilots. We will have comprehensive training plans. For example, for the fire department, our plan and training plan is a 40-hour classroom and hands-on plan that all pilots will go through. In addition to that, they will be required to attend monthly continuing education training. This is important because the technology is advancing rapidly. FAA and rules and requirements will be changing, and we want to make sure our pilots are always up to date on those requirements on the technology we're using. These type of plans will be built into all department programs that will be approved. The UAV technology itself has many safety measures built in. For instance, GPS technology is built into the units, so we will know where these units are at all times. They have obstacle avoidance firmware built into the unit, so they will not fly into a known structure. They will not fly into restricted airspace, for instance, around Sky Harbor. They also have a return to home function that if they were to lose that connectivity, that GPS tracking, they return back to their base. And all UAS or UAV programs approved and purchased will have went through that TS&P subcommittee that I mentioned, ensuring they are meeting all these requirements. And finally, all program managers will be required to maintain a comprehensive inventory and maintenance plan for their programs. So they'll make sure that software and firmware updates are being managed, make sure battery maintenance is being managed and replacement cycles are being adhered to, make sure preventive maintenance is being accomplished, make sure that all warranty and maintenance work is being accomplished in a timely manner. And finally, for me, I want to cover some of the regulations that all programs will follow. So we will follow all federal aviation or FAA requirements. A UAV or drone is an aircraft and heavily regulated by the FAA. As such, we will follow all their requirements. We will follow the City of Phoenix AR, as I've already outlined some of the structure built into that. In addition to the AR, we'll follow all city policies and procedures, public records requests, data storage requirements, and such. We'll also follow all information technology security standards, cybersecurity, data protection requirements as well. And then finally, all privacy standards already built into the city policies and procedures will be followed, and all constitutional protections will be afforded to our residents in our programs. That is built into all procedures. So with that, that concludes my portion. I'll now turn it over to Division Chief Dan Cheatham to talk about the fire department's use cases.
Thank you, Chief Walker, Assistant City Manager Bays, Madam Chair, subcommittee members, thank you for having me. The fire department sees UAS having an immediate impact in our emergency operations. For instance, the calls that you see on your screen, mountain rescues, giving rescuers the ability to cover large areas and quickly and safely locate the patients and remove them from the mountain. On structure fires, providing our incident command team with an aerial 360-degree view of the incident, and then also providing overwatch throughout that incident as an added layer of safety. Hazardous materials incidents, using the drone to go down range and do data collection rather than exposing our firefighters to those cancer-causing agents. And it also allows us, with quick reconnaissance, to mitigate that hazardous materials incident in a more compressed time frame. Brush and wildland fires, and it's almost that season, but utilizing the drones to give us that aerial view to see what's burned, where is this going, where can we cut it off, who might need to be evacuated, and we can make those notifications in a more compressed time frame. And then we'll utilize it for non-emergency operations, training, arson investigations, 3D mapping, and things like that. Last year alone, if we had UAS, we would have been able to deploy it on about 1,200 incidents. So we see this as a significant force multiplier for us. When it comes to privacy and security, fire department UAS will only be used for approved PFD missions. We'll follow all Federal Trade Commission guidelines and best practices. The drones that we have purchased have enterprise-grade security, and what that means is it's the highest level of security that public safety drones can come with. Data management. The fire department has adopted a phased-in approach. So in phase one, we do not plan on capturing any photos, data, and storing that. In phase two of our program, we will use a third-party software that has been approved through the Technical Security and Privacy Subcommittee to capture and store that data. All of our procedures have been reviewed and vetted by the city's contracted privacy attorney to make sure that we're within our guidelines. And all of this has set us up to leverage this technology to better protect our residents, firefighters, and our environment. I'm now going to turn it over to Police Commander Brian Lee from Phoenix PD. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Cheatham. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee.
Excuse me, Commander, sorry. Just one, Councilman Waring, did you have a question?
I did. I had a question that I think would be fire department specific. So I think my understanding is correct. When the police department has the body cameras, the footage, obviously members of the media might be interested in what's on those videos, but not every member of the public who's either not involved in the incident or it needs to be adjudicated or whatever, we have to go in and edit out like faces and identifying characteristics, correct? So in this case, if you're using the drone to go up for a mountain rescue or something, do the same rules apply? How does that work? I mean, it's not this, nobody's in that case being accused, I wouldn't think, of being a criminal or criminal activity, but they still might not want their faces all over network television. So how does that, I hope that you understand what I'm asking, like how does that work?
Yes, Madam Chair and Councilman Waring. The way that it works is similar to the way our PIO, how we process that video, is we will have redaction in place, along with this third-party software, Axon Air, who does provide service for the body cameras, that also comes with redaction capabilities. So we will have that ability to redact anything sensitive. Our public information officers also will look at any and all data, video, pictures that is collected to make sure that it stands up to all privacy standards.
So, and not trying to make light of it, but I'm envisioning a scenario, for example, you go up for a mountain rescue, somebody broke a leg, the TV news for some reason thinks that's a story, because there have been stories like that with helicopter rescues and stuff. There are other hikers or something in the background. Maybe one of them, a la Ferris Bueller, is ditching school or something, doesn't want their face on TV. Their right to privacy is protected. And I think most of the debates about these subjects are probably more police-related, is my guess. But the same rules kind of apply. And so this is a safety feature where civil liberties aren't being impacted, ultimately, I would argue, given what you're telling me.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, that's correct. And again, when we would release any of these videos to whether it's media or records requests, again, it would have to go through our redaction process to make sure, again, that everybody that's captured, that their privacy is protected and respected before we release that.
And the whole reason to use this relatively new tool is so that you can have a visual view of, oh, here's what we're getting into when we go up there, how dangerous is it, how are we going to approach this, and so forth. So you're still getting the information you need, but citizens shouldn't have a concern about how that video is going to be used as it pertains to them and their likeness and so forth.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, that's absolutely correct. They should not have any concerns about that. We're utilizing that to provide the live feed to the rescuers, to the incident command team, so we have a better understanding of the obstacles that are in place with that mountain rescue.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I have the same concerns about privacy I think are shared by other members of the council, but you've, I think, very adroitly answered some of those questions about how we can both use the tool, make your jobs more efficient, safer for you, more effective, but also protect citizens. So thank you for clarifying.
And if I'm correct, Chief, you stated in phase one, we're not recording any of this. So it is a live feed, and there would be no ability to share that because a public records request would come up with nothing because we're not recording. We're not keeping that.
Madam Chair, that is correct. We are not storing any of that. And when we do move into phase two of that process, the council will be informed that we have moved into the phase two.
Thank you,
that
sir.
is in place.
Madam Chair, if I could add also to another protection is for the fire department, the standard we live up to is the HIPAA standard. So specific Chairman, or I apologize, Councilman Waring, to your point, is a patient that was captured when we use video, we would not release a picture that would somehow be able to identify that as a patient. That would be a violation. We use the HIPAA standard, a very high standard, to make sure that we do not disclose individuals' faces, information that could determine who that was.
Thank you for that additional clarification. Any other questions at this point? Okay, thank you. All right, Commander.
Hey, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. So my portion of the presentation will cover just a couple of things here, specifically about how the police department intends to manage the program, a couple of use case examples, and also what the program is designed not to be used for. So with the police department, the Homeland Defense Bureau will be the ones responsible for administering the UAS program. It'll consist of a sworn supervisor that will be assigned as the Homeland Defense Bureau's UAS program manager. All requests from the field will require the authorization of a lieutenant or higher in order for them to make the request for UAS deployment. Once that request is made to the program manager is responsible for reviewing that request, ensuring that it meets the standards for the administrative regulation as well as our department policy prior to deploying either the equipment or the pilots to the scene. So the police department's identified 3 specific areas of our organization where we believe immediate efficiencies can be realized. First of all would be within our operations section, and this would be to support the operational deployment of officers and equipment in emergency situations, which would include high-risk, violent types of crimes in progress. This would be your hostage barricade situation, or scenes that involve large perimeters where scene integrity is paramount to make sure that we can manage that effectively. The second area would be our investigation section, and this would be utilized within our homicide unit as well as our vehicular crimes unit, where they have a need to document, measure, and locate all evidence at crime scenes and collision scenes as well as other major incidents. This would be used for specifically crime scene mapping and evidence collection, where you have very comprehensive, complex scenes where accuracy is extremely important. And then the third area that we've identified is within our event management section. And this helps to assist our decision makers in understanding the nature, scale, and scope of an event or incident, and for planning and coordinating an effective response for resources and personnel. So what this allows us to do is to be able to live stream in real-time information similar to what Chief Cheatham was describing on the fire side, to be able to understand exactly what's happening in real time to allow our leaders to make more effective and efficient decisions about the deployment of our resources and personnel in the field. With regard to privacy, it's the policy of the City of Phoenix that the operation of the UAS and all UAVs shall be carried out in a manner that respects and protects personal privacy consistent with the United States Constitution and federal, state, and local law. The police department will not use the UAS in order to violate a person's reasonable expectation of privacy. It will not be used to impinge on the right to free speech of any person. It will not be used in tracking or surveillance of any person or vehicle, and it will not use facial recognition technologies or software in the UAS. And it will not harass, coerce, target, or discriminate against persons based upon their ethnicity, race, gender, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity in violation of the law. With regard to transparency, the police department will submit policy changes to the UAS Technical Security and Privacy Subcommittee, as well as the UAS Executive Committee, for review and approval prior to the implementation of any said policy. The flight records and all the data telemetry that's captured will be available to the general public via public record requests, as they are today in accordance with existing department policy. We will also engage in additional ongoing community engagement and education as we continue to grow the program and share our best practices and identify solutions as we continue to build this program out into the future. This concludes my portion of the presentation. I'd like to turn it over now to Deputy Parks Director Jared Rodgers for his portion.
Before we move on, Councilman Waring has another question for you, Commander Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I went on a ride along in the Cactus Park precinct a few years ago now. As soon as we left the station, a fellow said, "By the way, do you see a helicopter?" Yeah, it's right over there. He said, "Well, that's where we're going," and he hit the gas. A fellow had been taking out his garbage, and I believe it was 3 people with a weapon took a shot at him for no reason whatsoever. A chase ensued. They wound up in a park, but next to a neighborhood, obviously armed. They took a shot at somebody. Police had to go in a massive sweep, had to go door to door in the neighborhood. It was quite the scene with the helicopter circling and so forth. But it also seemed incredibly dangerous for the officers because parks have hills, trees, playground equipment, plenty of places to hide, to get ambushed and so forth. Seemed, frankly, to me like a good way to get killed, but what are you going to do? You can't have people roaming around just shooting at people taking out their garbage. So eventually all 3 were caught, and they did find the gun. But drones were more of a new thing then. But it occurs to me, in that scenario, would you be using the drones to go scan the park rather than go in basically over hill and dale looking for someone who you know is out of their minds and try to shoot people for really no apparent reason?
Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, that's actually a good question, and that did come up during some of our community meetings, where the question about the difference between the application of a helicopter and the drone. So we wanted to be very clear that the drones are not intended to replace the helicopter. They are simply a complementary tool that we would use when the opportunity arises. So very different mission objectives, but the use of a drone is typically considered an option when we have a relatively closed or a secure area that we're specifically looking at. It's not something that we would use to follow a vehicle overhead during a pursuit. We would not use it in that capacity. It would have a much more localized application where we can control the perimeters and the boundaries of where that UAV would be deployed.
Thank you for that explanation. Part of the reason I was thinking this, now the park was closed. This was, night. People probably shouldn't have been in the park at that point. But they still have, some right to privacy, even if they were trespassing, I suppose. I guess I have mixed thoughts on that. The difference between the helicopter usage, because if you're down on the ground in the park, you're not part of the scenario that I just painted, you still could wind up in the spotlight. You still could wind up, I assume the helicopters have video to some extent to capture, what goes on, the interaction between officers and civilians and perpetrators and so forth. I'm sure that's probably the case. So I'm not sure that distinction I completely understand. And obviously if the drone gets shot down, It's just a piece of metal. So I understand. It sounds like you wouldn't use it in that scenario, at least as currently outlined. But it did occur to me, if we're already using the helicopters, what's really the difference if we're redacting, as we talked about with fire, if we're redacting out the faces of people who aren't really involved, just happen to get caught on video? Can you explain kind of the thinking? I'm just curious, what the analysis is from the department's perspective on that.
Sure. Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee. So the use of the helicopter, I guess the best way to describe that would be, we would use that for very wide area searches. When we look to deploy a drone, it would be in an area where we typically have a pretty good perimeter, where we have an idea that that's where a person is at. We would want to use it in a much smaller, more localized setting. Again, it's a tool that is not meant to replace what the helicopter can do, but as far as the video that's being live streamed back to the operator, that's used to help us just conduct that search to try to identify whatever it is that we're looking for. So in the case of a live stream scenario, we're not actually recording that unless there's a specific reason, because we're actually witnessing a crime and we're recording a crime. Otherwise, that video is just being live streamed to the investigators on the ground to help with their investigation. So with regard to redaction, any of the recorded video is kept for 190 days, and that would be redacted subject to public record request the way it is today, same with our body-worn camera. But live stream video that's not recorded, there wouldn't be any concern about that being released to the public because it is not retained. It's just live stream video that's being used by the investigators on the scene.
And Madam Chair, if I could ask for a clarification. So when you say the helicopters are also recording, I guess yes or no, because I got a little confused about which videos we were talking about when you talked about the live stream and not. So I assume the helicopters, to at least some extent, are recording the interactions, or am I wrong about that?
Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee. So the helicopters do have the capability of recording. Again, that doesn't mean that they record all the time. Typically, when a recording is made, it's at the request of ground units for something specific. I guess the best example would be like the execution of a high-risk search warrant. If they had a helicopter overhead providing aerial support, that might be a scenario where they might ask to have the actual overhead video recorded.
And I appreciate that clarification, because you already have the body cameras that are recording. If you're filming the interaction between yourself and a suspect that way, why wouldn't you want a potentially better view from on high, like you said, if you're doing a search warrant or something? But getting back to the drone specifically, so a park, it sounds like, is too big to use the drone. And I completely understand why sending the drone in is better than kicking a door if you have a hostage situation or something. Have you defined what's too broad of an area to use the drone? I mean, is it a footage thing? Is there a chance to use it outdoors, just not in a whole park? Do you see what I'm getting at?
I do. Thank you, Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee. So one of the things that enters into that decision-making is the time it takes to get the unit on scene. Typically, if an air unit is already overhead or already in the air, they could theoretically be overhead much quicker than it would take for a ground unit to bring a drone out and deploy it. So in those situations, you might see an airship overhead prior to the release of a drone. With regard to a specific area of footage, that really is kind of going to be up to the investigator on scene, the topography of the area that they're dealing with. The pilot is responsible for coming to the scene, making an assessment, observing the area to see if there's any visual obstructions that might pose a risk. If there's power lines or a satellite tower or things that might cause a concern for us, whether it's a day flight versus a night flight, wind conditions, all of those things have to be considered before he will even be authorized to put that drone in the air. Some of those things the actual helicopter doesn't have to worry about to the same extent, because they're typically flying at a higher level, and they're certainly a much more robust aircraft than what we would be deploying. So I guess the best answer is it would depend based on the actual conditions at the location. And
Madam Chair, we're still in the learning stage here, so it depends is a fair answer for now. Eventually, this is going to be fleshed out, though. I think I've heard this one discussed. I don't remember if it was at this meeting before. You're going down of paramount use or concern for me is the officer safety and how can the drones help with officer safety and firefighter safety. So you're chasing somebody down the alley, it's dark, there's garbage bins and places to hide and doorways and so forth. So an alley could be long, it could be wide, it could, have a lot of impediments. I would hope that you would at least consider using the drone in that scenario rather than go marching down the alley and potentially get injured or killed. Is that a fair? I mean, that's not a park, it's not quite as broad, but it could still be a fairly decent sized area, bigger than a house, I would think.
Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, yes, that's a fair assessment. And again, it'll be when that pilot comes on scene and sees what the specific area is that they're dealing with, that's where they're going to make that judgment call. But again, our primary emphasis for deploying these is to enhance officer safety, be smarter, use technology to be safer for both us and the public, and make sure that we can bring it to a safe and successful conclusion.
And I would think, not obviously have any firsthand use of really either technology, but Madam Chair, I would think a drone would be more helpful in the alley scenario with overhangs and places that someone could hide, like under a fire escape or something that wouldn't be visible from a helicopter, even with the lights from on high, but a drone being able to go lower and frankly not having the risk of life and limb either, would be able to handle that better than the helicopter would, I think for sure, in terms of impediments to view and so forth.
Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, yes, that's our assessment as well, and we hope that part of our continued community engagement and being able to come back to the subcommittee and kind of share some of those lessons learned and best practices. In a lot of ways, we're going to be identifying some of those best practices on a daily basis whenever we deploy, and that's really our intent, is to try to identify what's going to work best and how it can be used most efficiently. But again, I think in fairness to the community and to all of our officials, we want to make sure we share that back to the community and let them know this is where we've been able to realize some significant successes.
Madam Chair, I did assume that you were probably also studying other communities. We are not the first to think about using drones. We might be one of the last big cities. I'm not sure about that, but I know there are lots of other communities who have had experience with this. So I certainly hope that we'll, I think, give policy direction, but certainly I hope that you would come to us with details about what has been successful in other areas. And I do like, I tried to paint a couple of examples just to get a feel of like how could this be best used. But I would certainly, if there are other departments around the country who have had positive experiences in some of these scenarios that might not normally come up at this committee or the council or from the public, I'd like to know what those are. And then we can take them sort of on a case by case. But I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ansari.
Thank you, Chairwoman. While we're on this topic, I just wanted a little clarification. So within the police policy requirements on 9.2.1, it says, provide prior notice to public of general time frame and location of when UAS will be operated, will be provided except when that is not possible or reasonable for public safety operations. So we just heard a couple of potential examples. Could you give us a little bit more information about when it would be the case where we couldn't provide prior notice? And then to keep us transparent, could we post the date of when a drone was used and or a general location on that public website that was mentioned, maybe after the fact?
Councilwoman Ansari, members of the subcommittee, yes, that's actually what our intent is, in order to publish when it's being used, when we can in advance. So we just discussed some of the tactical scenarios where that would not be possible to do. However, post-event, we are capturing every time a drone is deployed. So we maintain the flight mission logs. Our policy is written so that it is consistent with the Administrative Regulation 1.56, where we talk specifically about anybody who has a complaint or wants to make notification of a complaint. They can do so either by contacting the city manager's office, they can utilize the city's integrity line, or we would even, to expedite it even further, if it's a police-related event, they could notify our communications operator, and they can go ahead and request a supervisor respond to the scene, and we can provide that information right on site. So okay. That's a much more expedient way of doing that, but we do have a variety of levels in place for people to be able to communicate that concern to us.
Okay,
And Madam Chair, if I may add something, Councilwoman Ansari, something else that we could do to your point earlier about the website, we plan to make regular updates to the council on the usage of drones, any changes that are approved through the subcommittee and executive committee process to policies, as well as how we're using the drones. So we could use that as the format to post on the website, as well as to provide the information to council members of these are the areas where we have been using drones. So a member of the public could easily look at that and say, okay, was this, the incident I'm thinking of, was that on the list of an actual usage of drones in that case? So we could provide that information.
That
And it would be more generic. It wouldn't be the actual footage posted online, but we could have a report that could indicate that scenario did utilize drones.
I think that would be helpful. And then just off the top of my head, I mean, obviously as council members, we get the regular updates when there's critical incidents from police and fire. Would it be excessive to be able to notify us at least as decision makers when a drone was utilized in those cases?
I think we can accommodate that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Garcia.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Don't have much to add. One thing I did appreciate was we're not using facial recognition. I think it is still disturbing that one of the answers is that you're going to go test this out. I think we need to make sure to understand that it's very different, the usage that police is going to have versus fire and parks. Both First and Fourth Amendment rights continue to be a huge concern for myself. Obviously, my colleagues decided to allow you all to test this out on the community. I think it still continues to be vague, and I think you're right. We're going to have to come back, both either when we get sued or hopefully we recognize our own mistakes and change things up. I think this department, unfortunately, has not known how to protect personal privacy consistent with United States, state, or local laws, and we've seen that in the last couple of years. And so I think I still feel, upset that we're moving forward with this, but willing to work with you all. I do think it's going to be on Lori and the city management to make sure that we stay on top of this. I think I would appreciate quarterly or every 6-month report, just kind of really working through what the usage is looking like and making sure we're not stepping over certain boundaries. I do think, obviously, with the Department of Justice investigation and everything else that's happening, we need to make sure we're following that. In order, really concerned about protests and events, but I guess we'll just figure it out as we go along. Yeah, I'm still concerned about the vagueness and really hope that it continues to be a work in progress and we can work together and we can respect those First and Fourth Amendment rights. I would like to, it's a broader conversation about how we work with charging agencies, but just wondering on all footage how it can and will be used in courts and how that will happen. But I think it's broader policy that we still have pending in conversations how we work with the charging agencies. So yeah, I think fire and parks make sense. I'm glad we have protections there, but I definitely want to make sure we kind of stay on top on First and Fourth Amendment issues we may have with police usage, and would really appreciate, if we can at the beginning, a quarterly report in this subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Councilman Waring.
So to the issue, Madam Chair, about the protest commander. So I assume if you can't, first of all, so people might be in a council chambers, for example, but you wouldn't use drones in here, plus there are cameras all over the place. Plus, it's a council meeting, not a protest. So I assume any protest activity of march is going to be outside in a big area. So a street or a park or something like that. So I assume if you're not using the park in the scenario that I described earlier, chasing suspects, you wouldn't have drones flying over a protest, because that would seem like that wouldn't make sense, given what we talked about earlier.
Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, again, I think the actual event is going to dictate whether or not it gets deployed or not. Again, when we're trying to, depending on what the event or the incident is that we're managing, if the use of real-time information is beneficial to help us with the deployment of our resources more effectively, to help us manage traffic, whether it's pedestrian ingress and egress or vehicular ingress and egress, especially in cases where we may have people that decide to enter into the roadways. If we can provide a safe environment, then that would be our primary concern. So it's possible, but I can't say that it would be in all cases.
Well, I appreciate your candor. I do think at some point specific clarification on what's a broader area and why would you use it in a broader area in one setting and not another would be hard to explain. So at some point there's going to have to be some meeting of the minds on this. Regarding the helicopters, I assume you already use the helicopters at large protests and gatherings and so forth now. So again, the distinction, I guess I'll just stop there. I assume I'm correct about that, right? That if there's a big protest, you're using the helicopter for the very same reason you just outlined here. Safety, ingress, egress, should we warn drivers that something's upcoming and divert them? I assume that's already the case, correct?
Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, so up until now, the helicopter's been the only tool that we have. Yeah. So if there is a request for information that we can't get in real time any other way, then we would call a helicopter in to ask them to fly overhead, check the scene. Are there any concerns or safety concerns that we need to be aware of so that we can make sure that we create that safe environment for the folks that are out there? This would be yet another option for us, that we wouldn't have to bring the airship down and pull it off of potentially a more violent type of crime they could respond to. We'd be able to use this tool as well if it were necessary.
Yep. And so I guess just for going forward, we talked about it earlier, but just if we're using helicopters for one thing, then I guess I'd like to know why we wouldn't use the drone for the same thing. And frankly, also the helicopters are enormously expensive to maintain, to fly, got to train people. So at some point, the drone, as it has in other areas of life, might replace some of the activities that have been, to this point, really expensive or even cost prohibitive. So if you could just kind of keep that in mind going forward, that's something I personally would like to see. And then we can decide what's the best use of the resource, what's infringing too much on civil liberties, what's not fair. Going back to the scenario I painted, the search in the park, I think I mentioned it was right by a neighborhood. So the search started where the suspects ditched their car in the middle of a neighborhood, and the officers, a lot of officers, had to go basically door to door to make sure they weren't hiding in a house, taking somebody hostage. They were going through bushes. Not one person popped out. You didn't see one curtain move. But I just kept thinking, wow, that's got to be pretty terrifying. All these officers, they didn't know what was going on because there was a chase, so the shooting didn't happen in that neighborhood. This is a neighborhood that must have been like, what the heck is going on here? You are searching through people's stuff. You're kind of looking through windows. You're trying to get a sense of like where these people might have been. That's also, it comes traipsing across my yard. That's kind of an invasion of my privacy too. We could debate which is a bigger invasion, sending up a few drones to try to spot the people before you do all that, or go through my yard when I had nothing to do with any of this and I'm just watching TV or I'm in sleep. So again, those are the kind of things I think of with the use of this. Technology, like how could we also make it better for the public and safer for the public, not just the officers, by using something that's a tool that we didn't have 10 years ago or however long it's been. So if you could kind of keep that in mind as well. But I am just slightly concerned about why would we use really a very similar tool that's much more expensive and not use this cheaper tool? Why would we use the cheaper tool in some instances in a park, but we wouldn't in others? I just think for everybody's sake, we need more consistency on these issues. In terms of like cameras over a protest, there are cameras all over the city. Some of them are government cameras, but if you go to, let's say there's a protest and there's a bank across the street, they got cameras all over the place. I assume if there's a crime committed, you would go to the bank and say, hey, you got any video facing out from your bank that might have caught this park and so forth? And that's not all being redacted, right? Because that's the bank's video. So am I correct in that? I assume that happens, maybe not on a daily basis, but happens pretty frequently. Is the scenario I'm painting a realistic one?
So Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, With regard to some of the third-party private cameras that are out there, yes, a lot of them do have cameras. If we have an investigation, and we will go out and canvass areas post-incident to try to identify whether there's any video footage that may have captured it or be helpful to the investigation. Sometimes we have folks that are willing to provide that. Sometimes they're not. And the video footage that they give us it may come in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's been redacted based on their own internal policies and procedures, and then when it comes to us, it becomes evidence and gets impounded and would be subject to our redaction prior to anything being released. So I guess the answer to your question is yes, there is video out there sometimes. Sometimes we can get it, sometimes we can't, but that would only be of use to us in the scenario that you painted as in a post-incident type of scenario, because we wouldn't have the ability to access all of those cameras live stream in real time. So we kind of get a little bit of both depending on what the incident is.
Yes, thank you. And I realize that would only be impactful after the fact. But if you are a protester or you're committing a crime or whatever it is you're doing, there's a decent chance you're on video somewhere with no redaction and so forth already. So again, that also kind of factors into at least my personal thinking about this. It's not video that's controlled by the government, but the government could potentially get it. I'm reminded of that every door I knock on with the Ring doorbells, which are up and down streets in District 2. So, you know, if you're not aware that you could be recorded if you're just walking down the sidewalk, and my understanding, those Ring I don't have one myself, but those Ring doorbells can take a very expansive view of things. I think you can set them so that they will alert you every car that drives by. I think that would drive me insane, but, you know, to each their own. I know police can get access to that. HOAs have access to that. You can link it all up. There are departments that have incentivized neighborhoods. I don't know that that's happened in this state, but I know in California, for example, some communities are like, everybody get a Ring doorbell, broaden it, and then if there's a crime, you'll be able to like follow the person along as they try to make their escape. With that as the backdrop for this discussion, that should also, I would appreciate, be factored into what you're thinking in terms of how are we using this tool and how different is that from the daily experience we're all living already? So I hope, I tried to use an example, maybe it wasn't a good one, but if you could kind of just have that in mind too when you come back with a finished product about how this is going to be going forward, because we're not the first people to be using drones. We're probably one of the last in terms of big cities, and I think it's unrealistic to think that we're never going to use drones. So accepting the fact that this technology is going to get used by the City of Phoenix Police, let's try to have some context in how it can be used fairly and effectively, and frankly efficiently, e.g. my example about the helicopters versus drones. Those are things that I'd like to have factored in. Thank you.
Okay, we will return back to Deputy Director Rodgers.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'm Jared Rodgers, Deputy Director in the Parks and Recreation Department. The particular division that I help oversee is the Natural Resources Division. We're primarily responsible for the mountain parks and desert parks throughout the city. And I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the intended uses that the Parks and Recreation Department sees utilizing. The first one you can see on screen is trail inspections. We intend to utilize imagery over time to recognize erosion patterns caused both by rainfall and by hikers and mountain bikers and equestrians. The UASs have capabilities of actually recording elevation data as the recording images that'll help us to measure the erosion of trails over time. We also have cultural resources throughout our preserves. We have a rich heritage from those who lived here before we did of archaeological sites that we intend to preserve in perpetuity. We recognize that being able to get to those sites and photograph them and monitor them over time will be very beneficial without drawing undue attention to them. Every time we have to hike out to some of these locations, that creates more and more of a defined foot traffic pattern. We also have a fair amount of invasive species that can lead to fire danger, also just leads to choking out native plant material. So we can utilize the technologies to monitor the growth of those invasive species and then also keep track of how our volunteer and our own efforts to remove those plants are going over time. We also have some areas in the preserves that unfortunately trash and debris collect over time. This will also allow us to monitor our efforts in reducing those areas. We are an early adopter along with our colleagues in police and fire. However, we're a little bit behind them. We're in the process of working through our standard operating procedures, and we'll be submitting for membership to the City UAV Committee. We're also working with fire and police to identify the proper UASs for the systems that we need to take advantage of, as previously mentioned. The last bullet here is an important one. In the Parks Department specifically, our SOPs will be designed to protect the wildlife and preserves. We don't intend to be monitoring a particular hiker or user activity, but to actually monitor and protect the preserve for future use. And with that, I'll turn it back over to
Madam Chair, at this time, if there are any additional programmatic questions, we'd be happy to answer those about any of the three departments. If not, we're happy to proceed.
Are there any additional questions at this time?
So we're going to talk about the community engagement feedback and what we changed in our policies based on that feedback. Do you want me to continue with that? And then, okay. So with that, I'll move to the next slide. So we did conduct 15 community engagement meetings in the months of March and April at the council's direction from the February 16th council meeting. At those meetings, we presented the content of our draft policies, which already included the feedback from our contracted privacy attorney. And we also presented similar information to what we presented here today about the uses of drones in each of the three departments. We told everyone who attended one of these engagement meetings that we had a website available for them to review the full policies if they would like to do that, and we had those policies posted online. We also posted a recorded version of the presentation so that if anybody wasn't able to attend one of our live meetings, that they could actually watch the presentation online at a later date. We accepted comments in the meetings as well as via email at our city manager's email box at contact@Phoenix.gov. And then we also posted the questions that we received through those engagement sessions and the answers to those questions online in a frequently asked questions format. So that is available publicly as we speak. So that was our process that we went through to conduct community engagement. We committed to conduct at least one session in each council district, which we did, and we actually went above that in some of our districts. As I mentioned, we created a web page. Initially, it started as a newsroom story and then actually developed into a web page, which we will have as our ongoing page to provide updates on the program to members of the public, to post the reports that we discussed a few minutes ago, as well as any changes in policy that are approved going forward. Some of the questions or the feedback that we received, which by and large was very positive at the meetings, but there were some questions, some were very technical and some were broader. We were asked about the research that we conducted in developing our policies. We talked about our implementation timeline, or received questions about that. We got questions and comments about cost, safety, utilization of the drones in the different departments, as well as some very technical questions about equipment logistics and what types of drones we would be purchasing, as well as questions on privacy and how members of the public would be able to have input going forward. So with all of that, we did incorporate several changes to our policies based on that feedback. One of the things that we added that I think is probably one of the most significant changes is that we added community or private sector participation on the executive committee itself. So Scott talked about the governance structure, and the executive committee is the approving body for all citywide drone usage and the standard operating procedures or department policies in each department that will be utilizing drones. And on that committee, we have added 2 seats to, as soon as we are able to fill those, to the executive committee for members of the public to participate. So we will have one seat that we will prefer to have someone who has some level of expertise in privacy or civil liberties, and so that will be one seat available. If we're not able to find someone with that expertise that's interested, although I think we will be able to, then we will be able to fill that with a member of the public at large. And then the other seat is specifically for a member of the public at large, anybody who's interested in participating. We do plan to have an application process to allow anybody who's interested to submit their application for interest in serving on that committee, and so that's how we will select those seats. We also received comment on making it a little bit clearer where the public can file complaints if anybody has a concern about how we're using drones, and so we beefed up that language in both the administrative regulation as well as in the department policies, and it's actually now a requirement for departments who have a department policy or have a program that they would spell out in their department policies exactly where a member of the public can file a complaint. We will also be posting that information on our website as well. And those locations are the city manager's office or the city's integrity line if the individual doesn't want to go directly through the department in question. So that is our policy change there. We also were asked to specify that we will label our drones with the City of Phoenix logo and label them as City of Phoenix drones so that a member of the public can tell the difference between one of our drones and perhaps somebody else's. And so that is something that we would have done anyway, but we didn't have it spelled out in our policy, and so we've added that information. We also received a police department specific question about search warrants and clarifying when those are required. And the simple answer to that, and Commander Lee can correct me if I'm incorrect here, but the simple answer is if a search warrant is required in any other circumstances, it would be required for the use of a drone. And so we spelled that out a little bit more clearly in our policy. And then we also added language about, or beefed up our language again in relation to what happens if we have an employee who violates this policy, and that we will take that extremely seriously, that we will investigate those situations and apply appropriate discipline up to and including termination, so that will be enforced, and that we will expect our employees to follow those policies and to maintain the standards that we've established within the citywide policy as well as the department policies. And then finally, this is not incorporated into the policies per se, but we are committing to provide regular updates to the mayor and council. We were specifically asked by some council districts who don't have the opportunity to participate on this particular subcommittee that we would provide regular updates through the general information packet to the full council, as well as to this subcommittee, as often as the chairwoman would like us to come and present. So those are the changes that we have incorporated. We have actually produced redline versions with these additional changes made and posted them online. They were also sent to council members night before last, and so those changes are now available for review by the council, and we will be moving forward with finalizing our policies. As far as the department policies go...
Excuse me, sorry, Lori. We have a question from Councilman Waring. Sure.
And I think the public can see at home, but it was in our written copy, the developed citywide policy for camera usage. I think my questions were trying to sort of get to that point. I think these other changes are excellent and warranted, and I'm glad they were incorporated, and it's good that they came out of the process. But the develop a citywide policy for camera usage strikes me because I think, my questions were all kind of, we need to have a sort of a firm guideline of like, when are we going to use these? And if that changes, come back to us. I do want the regular updates about if something's going to change. But it struck me, this is not a criticism of police. I think there are more moving parts with the use of it for police purposes. For fire, I think, forgive me, maybe this is going to be offensive somehow, I think it's more straightforward. You've got a mountain rescue, you've got a fire, you're trying to figure out like what's the safest route in and so forth. Chief, I hadn't even thought about the HIPAA implications. Most of the things you're doing, somebody's hurt and has that right to privacy, just like they would with a doctor. So I hadn't thought about it from that angle. So I don't know that a policy that's citywide, as I said here, that works for fire necessarily makes sense for police, with the use of helicopters, the different scenarios, the different interaction with the public. It's not necessarily somebody that's hurt. It's maybe somebody who's trying to hurt other people. The firefighters obviously risk life and limb as well, but it's just a different kind of job. It's not usually other humans trying to attack them and so forth. So, that you're not, the fire doesn't have a right to privacy. The mountain doesn't have a right to privacy. So it's just a little bit different. So a blanket policy might not make sense. I hope I'm articulating this well in that regard. I definitely think police is going to get a different level of scrutiny, perhaps appropriately so. It also has different needs. And so when I talk about the helicopter versus the drone, it doesn't make sense if sometimes we're going to use one, sometimes we're going to use the other, even though they're doing exactly the same things. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. I really think we got to straighten that out. And I think that's of paramount importance to be looked at sort of right now, to be able to articulate why we're doing things in a certain way. However, I also think if you're at a protest or something and you think there's no chance you're going to be caught on somebody's camera, with all the camera phones, with all the businesses that have cameras, even if the city of Phoenix never put up a drone, never had a helicopter, and never bought a camera, there's a good chance you're still going to be on camera somewhere. Maybe people find it, maybe they don't. That also has to be baked into the cake a little bit. What's realistic? I know some folks voted against, potentially even using drones, and I understand why, and I'm sensitive to those arguments. I understand what they're saying, but I don't think it's realistic with these rapid changes in technology that we're going to be the outlier that's not going to use it. That doesn't seem realistic to me either. So there's a lot of things that I would hope we would bake in the world we live in, what the expectations realistically should and could be, particularly in regards to the use by police. I came away from this thinking fire has already kind of got that built into the mix, but I also think they have, no disrespect, fellas, a little bit of an easier lift in terms of the expectation. I think people will generally be extremely excited and happy if they get rescued because the drone found them out in the wilderness, so the firefighters knew exactly where to go and to send their helicopter. I don't think there's going to be a complaint about that, particularly if you redact faces and so forth. The police use of helicopters and drones, that's going to be different and looked at differently. So I would certainly hope as we try to develop a policy, I'm not sure one size fits all, if that's what this sentence here, that again I don't think is actually on the screen for the folks at home, but is on our sheet here, you did allude to it, is necessarily the only way to go. I'm not claiming I'm right about this or I have all the answers, far from it. I just think some nuance, some realism needs to be incorporated, and I'd appreciate, I don't know if I helped at all with that, but that's what I'm looking for going forward.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, I appreciate that feedback. And to be fair, most of our citywide administrative regulations are a higher level view. They are, looking at an overarching policy that will apply to all departments, and then the department level policies are the ones that really get into the, the nitty gritty, if you will, related to their specific uses, their specific needs and operations. And that's where, the specifics of the procedural implementation belong. When we talk about having a citywide camera policy, and again, that's completely separate from this drones policy, which is why, it's not included in the presentation today, is the need to have some overarching, privacy expectations and the way that employees will handle any equipment that has a camera included in it, whether that's a drone or a fixed camera or some other, body camera or some other thing. We have to make sure that we're respecting individuals' privacy rights and also recognizing that there are situations where there is no legal expectation of privacy because someone is in the public. And so trying to balance those things as well as the operational needs that you alluded to are exactly what we'd be trying to get at. But really the goal of a citywide policy would just be to establish those expectations of transparency, privacy, records retention, those kinds of things that need to be included in all departments' usage of cameras. as we move forward, to your point about, the evolution of our drones programs, we will be able to come back to the subcommittee and actually talk to you about how we have used drones as opposed to how we envision it going forward. And I think that'll be a lot more useful conversation because it is a learning process. As a matter of fact, some of us had an opportunity to go yesterday and learn about the way that another police department in the Valley is utilizing drones and cameras. And they were able to show us this is an actual case where we used a drone and this is what we did with it. And that's going to allow us to show you more specifically and show the public more specifically this is what we're doing with them and this is how we're using them based on the policies that we've just outlined. So it'll be able to provide a much more real life vantage point of what is being done and what's not being done. And of course, we'll be receiving feedback and making changes along the way as we grow and develop our programs. So I think it is fair to ask the questions and to have us consider, helicopters versus drone usage. I think the simple answer is there will be times where we do use drones where we have otherwise used helicopters up to this point because we didn't have drones available to us. There will be other times when the helicopter is more appropriate. And as we move forward, we'll be much better at defining exactly when those situations typically occur. But right now, because we don't have both options, it's more difficult to define, exactly how much of a perimeter area is suitable for a drone versus a helicopter. And those are things that we're also going to be developing as we purchase the actual drones, which I'll talk about in a minute, because those decisions are still being made this month, as a matter of fact. And so we're moving forward with defining some of those things, and we'll have those answers for you very soon.
I just, Madam Chair, and I'll stop. I guess, we use the protest example, but really anything that's in the public. I'm not sure what we're going to say if the officer has a body camera. At the time, a lot of people weren't on the council then. I think 8 members voted for the cameras on the officers. So an officer standing right there, they got the camera on, something happens. We didn't send up a drone because we didn't think that was fair game, but we did send up a helicopter that's videoing everything. And then if we have dispute about what happened, these officers go to the bank across the street that's got video cameras, and they've got it, and they might get cell phone footage from people who are at the scene. At some point, we're going to have to explain why video from one source was okay and one isn't, and why we're doing one thing and not. And I didn't get the sense throughout this that there was a coherent whole to what we were doing. A particular concern was we wouldn't send up a drone, but we're already sending up the helicopters for the same activity. I just think we're going to send them up for the protest at the park potentially, but we're not going to do the chase in the park, even though it might be the exact same park. I just think at some level there needs to be a coherent whole of here's what we're doing and why, here's why we think it's okay, and then have community meetings, come to the council, and we can debate the merits of it. And as we've already seen with a previous vote on this issue, there will be people on both sides, both having strong arguments, I might add. So, again, I don't know if I'm articulating exactly right, but I hope you understand kind of what I'd be looking for when you come back, here's what we created. I was just a little concerned, it's nobody's fault, with so many moving parts, I understand why, about things that seem like they would overlap or be the same, and we're not using one and we are using the other. This is the same piece of land. We're going to use it in this scenario. We're not going to use it in that scenario. I didn't hear an exact why that made sense to me. Maybe I'm alone in that. But thank you.
Please continue.
Thank you. So to just provide you a status update on the department policies themselves, the fire and police department policies have been submitted to the TS&P subcommittee outlined in our governance structure, and they will both be submitted to the executive committee for review and final approval on May 23rd. The Parks and Recreation Department policy is still in development, and when that is ready, it will go through the same approval process. As far as the drone purchases, the fire department has issued its purchase orders and anticipates the delivery of 3 UAVs within the next 2 weeks, so that we can meet our target of launching the fire department program by June 1st. And the police department is finalizing its equipment order, and again, that should be placed this month. As far as training goes, the fire department has developed a training program that Chief Walker outlined and currently has 10 certified UAV pilots. They will be receiving training from the vendor on the specific UAVs that they purchased once those are delivered to us. And the police department is in the process of identifying any department employees who currently have a Part 107 drone certification, and that training will begin when the UAVs are received, because we actually need the drones to do the training, so we need to wait until we receive those. We hope to have those in our possession and to be able to conduct that training this fall. And then the next steps are that we will receive final feedback from council members. I am requesting to receive that by May 23rd. We have a need to finalize our administrative regulation and policies for fire specifically so that we can meet that June 1 launch date, but also for police. And then we will order and receive the UAVs as I outlined. The fire department does plan to launch in June, and the police department plans to launch after the UAVs have been received and training and certification has been completed for the drone team on the police department. Parks and Recreation is a bit further behind that schedule as they came into this process a bit later. They will launch after their policies have been completed and approved through the 2 committees, as well as they've received their drones and their training and certification has been completed there. So that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to have any further discussion or answer any further questions.
Councilwoman Ansari.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Lori, one question about the committees. So if we added community members, to serve on the executive committee, did we consider doing so for the subcommittee, and why did we ultimately not choose to include community members there?
We did consider that. The reason that we decided upon the executive committee is because it allows for a broader representation of folks to actually apply to participate. The Technical Security and Privacy Subcommittee is very technical and specific to the expertise that's on that committee, and so we would have to really narrow down members of the public that were actually qualified to participate on that committee. So the executive committee seemed more appropriate, and the executive committee is also the higher level committee for the final approvals of policies.
Okay, understood. No other questions from me. I guess hearing the discussion today, I would say that I kind of agree with my colleagues that I think it's still, obviously it's a learning process. I appreciate your comment that we're not going to know all of the answers now. So I think if I had a request to the chairwoman would be for this subcommittee to receive regular updates about every instance in which we've used this, what results has that made in policy changes. I agree. I mean, I live my life expecting that we have no real privacy anywhere. I fully agree with that. But at the end of the day, we are a government entity and we're held to a different standard. And obviously our police department especially is undergoing several different investigations and held to a different standard. So I think we need to be very, very careful and make sure that we are being very specific. And maybe we just don't know all of those answers at this moment, but I agree that we can't have any vagueness in when we will be using it and what instances. You know, I think that needs to be very clear. I also appreciate that as council members, we can get the text updates moving forward for when they are utilized. I think that will be helpful for us to begin understanding this as well. But yeah, I think if I have one comment, I think it's moving in the right direction, and I appreciate all of the changes that have been made thanks to community engagement. But I think we need to just be very careful and keep everyone in the loop. Thank you.
Are there any more? Councilman Waring.
My probably way too many statements should not be interpreted as that I don't appreciate the work that was put into this. I know it was a lot. I understand it's really complicated, a lot of moving parts. Technology is changing every day. So I don't want my comments to be interpreted like that. The scenario I'm trying to avoid is an officer gets shot or killed, and somebody, a loved one, the media, us, asks, did you use the drones? Well, no, and the answer is why not, and we don't have a very coherent fact-based reason for why not. The stakes are just too high. So, or a citizen gets killed, and there's debate about if you used a drone, maybe you wouldn't have to take the lethal force or something. Same scenario. So that's what my questions, I think, ultimately are getting at. But you've certainly, I think, moved the ball since the last time we had this discussion, and I appreciate the things that were included on page, I think it's 11. I'm trying to do that without my glasses. So I appreciate that very much, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
I believe we have 2 public comments. I'd like to take those now.
Our first speaker is Frank Steinmetz, virtually. Frank, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You may proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair and subcommittee members. Drones are drastically needed to save the lives of police, firefighters, and citizens. Put yourself in the body of the public servants that have recently been killed or injured, and what the outcome would have been had we had drones to check out those properties totally prior to entry. Be a firefighter. Has to climb a mountain not knowing what surrounds a fallen person. With a drone, it can check out the area faster and provide the life-saving information for those coming to help. It is very important to keep getting the message out to those who question the drone usage, to understand that the drones have a specific job and may not be gathering info at all times. I spoke with a gentleman who stated he did not like drones because the police and other services do not like an organization that he belongs to. He says he is concerned the police will use a drone to follow him to their meetings. Interesting, isn't it? He knows he's a part of a group that is questionable. That is why he is concerned a drone can be used against him. I told him no, drones are not used for surveillance. How many of the people have voiced objection to the drones are illegal citizens, have broken the law, have outstanding warrants, doing illegal businesses or illegal activities? When there is a violent crime being committed or a person laying on a mountaintop, that drone is assigned to that one project. There are numerous cities, counties, and states that have been using drones for years. Look at why they have been so successful versus what we're going up against right now. Thank you. Stay safe and healthy.
Our next speaker in the upper council chambers is Stan Bates.
Good morning, Chairman O'Brien and members of the subcommittee. I'll keep my comments very limited this morning, but I want you to know that I fully support the use and purchase of drones for the police, fire, and parks department. It's just a shame that it took an event like the one in February where 9 officers were injured to get the police included in this process. It goes without saying, but I want to emphasize that the equipment will be invaluable to all 3 departments as they carry out their duties. Along the lines of obtaining the drones, I'm also very elated to see that the 27th Avenue project is going to use the cameras, gunshot detectors, and license plate readers so that we can get a better grasp of what's going on and hopefully expand that throughout the city as well. Rest assured, these drones are absolutely necessary, and I fully support the subcommittee's approval. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you to both of our speakers. Councilman Waring has a comment.
I did have one more question that just occurred to me. So obviously we use the service animals. I think both departments do, but I think police for sure. I think people would be shocked to know how many of those service animals have been killed in the line of duty. Part of the reason I know how many is because as a state senator, I sponsored the bill that created a monument, and it's still out there, honoring those dead animals. There have been service animals killed in my time here on the council, and I'm very aware how traumatic that is for the officers or other handlers and so forth. What I don't know, and the one I'm thinking of specifically that was killed, and I think in 2016, 17, would be a scenario where probably we'd be using a drone today. They sent in the dog, I think in a hostage situation. Do the dogs have cameras on them when they get sent in? I can't remember the exact scenario. I just know the dog was sent in and then was murdered. Was the
Councilman
goal
Waring?
was it with a camera or something, or?
I'm sorry,
What was
Councilman-
the dogs sent in that scenario? Like, do they have a camera on them? Is it
Councilman
something
Waring,
that
members of
a drone could replace the dog's activity and thereby not get killed in that scenario?
Councilman Waring, members of the subcommittee, it's my understanding, especially going back to that date and time, that we do not have any cameras that are attached to the actual animals themselves, and they would have been succeeded by the implementation of the body-worn cameras that we now have today, but there would not be one on the dog, it would just be on the handler.
Okay. And I don't think I ever got a full hearing at that stage about why that dog was sent in specifically. I just know that it happened and he was killed. But obviously, if that's a scenario that can be, the drone can supplement their activities and have fewer dead animals, that's also something I'd like to see. But that may not be their role, so that may not be helpful in this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you, committee members, and thank you to our public members who came to speak and who spoke virtually. I would like to thank all of you for your hard work on this. I know that in addition to our official city meetings, myself and my staff attended 14 additional community meetings and spoke with over 600 citizens. And during that time, overwhelmingly, the feedback was positive. We did receive questions and some concerns about individual rights, and I appreciate the city's efforts to address those and make sure that those answers are available on our website. But by and large, the response was in favor of providing this additional tool to both our public safety agencies, police department and fire department, as well as our parks department. The concerns shared with us have been rectified in the changes you've made, and I appreciate that you did make those changes, especially to add public participation in the executive committee, to be more specific in some of our policies related to discipline if it is not used properly. The truth is that over 1,500 government agencies already use drones across the United States, and over 1,100 of them are law enforcement agencies. So we're not trailblazers by any stretch of the imagination. I do know that we still have a lot of questions to be answered as it relates to how we use them in Phoenix. It seems like there might be a little bit of more gray area than we'd like. However, I know that our agencies will be working hard to make the best decisions in those individual situations while following our policies to keep our citizens' right to privacy, as well as ensure their safety, as well as the safety of our personnel. So I am most pleased with the progress we have made in the last few months in this, and I'm excited to have this tool available to our department. So we will, I do assure you all that we will get those updates. I like Councilwoman Ansari's request to get text messages when we use them, and we will have quarterly or whatever seems to be the appropriate amount of updates at public safety, in addition to putting it in the general information packet. Thank you for that change as well. If there are no other questions or comments, we have future PSJ agenda items on the agenda. Are there any other requests? Councilman Garcia.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I think one request I'd have is we had an ad hoc committee last year, almost 2 years ago, and I'd love to get an update on where things have gone since then, and an update on, kind of where those recommendations are at by the police department or by staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, then we will see everybody in June, and with that, we adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
It's just one reason companies turn to Phoenix for workforce solutions. Even though Valley Forge has been around for a while, Michelle's father saw a need for this type of workplace solution: fasteners. How did Valley Forge get its name?
So Valley Forge is about a forging shop in the Valley of the Sun. And my dad is quite patriotic, so he thought Valley Forge. I'd also like to mention my mother and her involvement in Valley Forge. She was sales manager for a long period of time, helped us become profitable, and she retired in 2008. And they're both still, my dad still comes in once or twice a week. He's still thinking up new inventions that he can, patent and we can make for customers. It's always been about solving the customer's problems and making it an easier world for them.
The world